Gumba Malgan Gumba Nanigia Nindu, which is good day. It's good to see you here in Burragum language, which is the community in which I grew up on the Darling Downs. 2019 is the International Year of Indigenous Languages, and here at the State Library we're aiming to preserve and document our traditional languages, so we'll be sharing those with you in the coming 12 months. I'm Vicky McDonald, and it's my great privilege to be the State Librarian and CEO of the State Library of Queensland, your state library, and also to welcome you here this evening for our second Queenslanders in Conversation for 2018. We also welcome our online viewers on Facebook Live and via the live stream on the State Library website. But let me begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay respects to the elders who came before them. The State Library is located on Kirilpa Point, which is a traditional meeting, gathering and sharing place for Aboriginal people, and we proudly continue that tradition today and certainly this evening. I would also like to acknowledge and welcome this evening our event partner, ABC, and tonight's facilitator, ABC Brisbane presenter Rebecca Livingston, and also our 5 panellists who will be sharing their stories and insights with you this evening. Dr. Alana Thompson, Jackie Ryan, Paul Niho, Mark Peters, and Professor Fabrizio Camani. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome everybody. It's fantastic to see you all here tonight. So the Queenslanders in Conversation series provides a platform for energetic conversations about things that matter. Tonight we explore the concept of the mega event. As humans, we are constantly trying to supersize the everyday, from ice cream cones to sporting events, and this need for bigger and better is not without controversy. Mega events have the power to excite a nation, and they can promote civil engagement and revitalise a city. But they can also leave host cities and nations the worse for wear, both economically and environmentally. Tonight we look at the legacy of mega events and what can be done to ensure that they are positive and long-lasting. The organisers of the Gold Coast 2018 Commonwealth Games understood the polarising effect a large sporting event can have on a community. Many of you here tonight will have been directly or indirectly impacted by the Commonwealth Games. Your experience may have been a positive or negative or even a bit of both. But you may have also lost your voice cheering at the netball or have been inconvenienced by the public transport delays, which I guess weren't as bad as we all expected. Either way, you probably had some connection to the Games or at least an opinion about it. Another mega event held 30 years ago remains embedded in the memories of many Queenslanders. Whether you were a university student with a cherished season pass, a CBD worker who took advantage of the nightly entertainment, an awe-struck international traveller, or an outraged protester, World Expo 88 marked a turning point in Brisbane's development and history. And at State Library of Queensland, we want to inspire possibilities through knowledge, stories and creativity. And the story of the Commonwealth Games and Expo 88 can be found in our collections, our exhibitions and also our programming. The bright, bold, Boundless display in the Asia Pacific Design Library explores the design story behind the innovative Queen's Baton, which draws inspiration from the boundless energy of the people, place and spirit of the Gold Coast. And our current exhibition in the SLQ Gallery, Lifestyle, A Sunshine State of Mind, is a beautifully curated, immersive experience that explores Queensland's sensibility, our hope and our dreams, our quirks and our connections to one another and the places we live. It reflects the depth and diversity of our experiences as Queenslanders. The way we live and play is explored through State Library's rare and restricted collection items, contemporary stories and some hands-on activities. If you have not had the chance to visit either the display or the exhibition, I encourage you to do so after tonight's talk, and we've kept both spaces open this evening until 8 p.m. so that you have the opportunity to visit. You can also jump online to experience both of these curated events, and you'll see them on our website. As with everything we do here at State Library, Queenslanders in Conversation is richer when you participate, so we encourage you to do so this evening by joining the conversation and share stories, insights and questions online using the hashtag SLQConvo, which is up there on the screen as well. And of course our handle is SLQLD. Audience members will be given an opportunity to ask questions later in the evening, so please raise your hand at that time and we'll bring one of the roving mics to you. If you'd like further information on any of our State Library events and exhibitions, please have a chat to one of our staff members who is here this evening, or head to our website for further details. So just a reminder before we start that this event is being broadcast and live streamed, so the front doors have been locked. You'll need to exit through the doors at the back there if you need to leave. We are really proud to be partnering with ABC for tonight's Queenslanders in Conversation. So now I'd like to hand over to our facilitator for this evening, Rebecca Livingston. Rebecca.
Thank you, Vicky. Hello, everybody. Well, Jingaree, as I should say, which is what I learnt in the local language when I visited the athletes' village on the Gold Coast, and I'm thrilled to see a pair of game shapers in the front row tonight with the uniform on. I hope you have not taken those shirts and jackets off since the opening ceremony. Welcome, guys. So let me, before I introduce our mega panel tonight, tell you what's confused me this week about mega events. It sort of messed with my mind, because this week at work I said to a colleague at work, oh, did you go to Expo 88? And he looked at me and said, I wasn't even born. So that made me feel a bit like I was getting older at a rapid rate. But then I started thinking about it, because there we were at the ABC studios at South Bank, and I know where he plays, relaxes, drinks at bars, eats at restaurants, goes for walks along those pathways. All of those things that, arguably, are there because of that event 30 years ago that kicked off on the 30th of April 1988. So just because he wasn't born when that mega event occurred, does that mean he's still feeling the tremors or the consequences of it? Maybe. But does that make his connection to that mega event any more or any less? I want to try and get to the bottom, or get to an answer to that tonight, because we're going to go back in time and go forward in time with this mega panel this evening. Professor Fabrizio Carmignani is the Dean of Economics, or Professor of Economics at Griffith University in the Business School. His street title is he's our money man for tonight. He'll crunch some numbers for us. And I've asked each of our panellists to, by their own criteria tonight, begin by telling you about, briefly, a mega event in their own lives. Fabrizio, what's been a mega event in your life?
Well, good evening. Being here as a money man is pretty mega, if you ask me.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd like to go back in time, and it was probably May 1989 when I traveled as a supporter of my team, AC Milan. I'm talking about real football, the football that we play in Europe. And as a young supporter, I traveled to Barcelona for the final of the Champions League between my team and a Eastern European team. And it was a pretty mega event. About 80,000 people from Milan traveled by bus or by plane to Barcelona, and I was one of the 80,000 traveling.
Did you get the right result?
Yes, because the drive back from Barcelona to Milan would have been a disaster if we had lost. And this was actually my main concern when I decided to go. I said, what if we lose? How am I going to travel on a bus with another 50 supporters like me after a defeat? But we won. We won 4-0. By the way, good old times. My team is not doing so well today. But it was a mega event for myself, I guess, because, as I said, I was young, and traveling by myself with other supporters was very exciting. But it was actually a mega event because of this incredible community of supporters that traveled from Milan. I mean, it's a long drive from Milan to Barcelona, 80,000 people, and probably there were several thousand more who got to Barcelona and couldn't get into the stadium. And it was extremely peaceful, which sometimes it's not always the case in European football. Extremely successful. And when I think about that event, I really have the impression of how a mega event or a large event in sport can have an impact on the people who participate,
Yes.
but also on the community, on the hosting community in a number of ways. I guess that some people in Barcelona were a bit disrupted by such a large presence of Italians all around the stadium. But overall, I think it was a great experience for the community. And to me, that's what a mega event is about.
Brilliant. I'm so glad you won as well.
Thank you.
All right. Now, not that I didn't enjoy that story, but we got a lot to get through tonight. So your mega events can still be mega, but you need to tell us about it in a shorter length of time. Paula Niho is here tonight as well, ladies and gentlemen. She's a Gamilaroi woman who, as a member of the Yugambeh Museum Language and Heritage Research Centre team, was involved in the cultural impact of the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games. Paula, what's been the mega event in your life?
Jingri Jimbalang, Nyanyanari Paula, in the Yugambeh language of southeast Queensland. Hello friends, my name's Paula. I grew up in Broken Hill, and an event we looked forward to every year, which was pretty mega, it was a bit extreme, was the Barra Push, where teams of 4 would push a wheelbarrow from Menindee to Broken Hill, 110 kilometres, in that heat. And as a spectator, that was pretty amazing to me. But as a participant, from a family perspective, now I'm married with 3 children, I couldn't beat the GC 2018 Gold Coast Commonwealth Games. It was amazing. It was mega.
Pushing wheelbarrows to the Gold Coast Games. I love it. Our next guest tonight is a man who is sort of living in the twilight zone at the moment, because he is the Chief Executive Officer of Goldoc. He's been there from the beginning in terms of the Commonwealth Games. Now the Games are over, but your work continues, Mark Peters. And for your mega event, I'm going to ban you from saying the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games. Mark has been involved in sports administration. He was the CEO of the Australian Sports Commission for 10 years. He was president of the Australian Baseball Federation and an executive member of the International Baseball Federation. What's been a mega event in your life?
Well, good evening, and Jingri. I'm in a little trouble now. My kids being born were mega events, but I think my wife went through most of the agony associated with that. But perhaps my mega event's still to come. I'm a proud Gold Coast resident. We've had this remarkable event, which isn't just about sport. It's about a city and the city's future. And I think the mega events for the Gold Coast are going to continue to come. And it's about that roundedness of the city and what's happened and come out of that, and I'm sure we'll talk about that, because I think in your introduction, some cities haven't benefited from what is a large expense and also an incredible number of people involved. So to me, my mega event will be a series of events that come to the Gold Coast because of this absolutely wonderful Commonwealth Games that we just ran.
Oh, okay. Prediction of future mega events. Thank you. Next to Mark tonight is a woman who says she grew up at World Expo 88. Jackie Ryan, Dr. Jackie Ryan, holds a PhD in History and Political Science from the University of Queensland. She is an award-winning comic series producer called Burger Force, but it was World Expo 88 where you found yourself. Jackie Ryan, good evening, welcome. What's been the mega event in your life?
Well, spoiler alert, Expo. In the mega spirit of the evening, it's a 4-part answer, but it's very fast. So attending Expo as a school kid, loving every minute of it. Years later, doing my PhD on Expo. Later again, getting a book deal about Expo. And just last week, launching the book on Expo. That's my mega event. It's 30 years and going.
Brilliant. And rounding out the panel tonight, Dr. Alana Thompson, who's from the Department of Tourism, Sport and Hotel Management at Griffith University. Alana really looks at the social and sporting legacies of for host communities from large-scale sports events like the Gold Coast 2018 Commonwealth Games. Alana also timed her move to the Gold Coast perfectly to coincide with the Games itself. But for you, Alana, a mega event in your life?
Yeah, thanks. So I grew up in Sydney, and I guess it's a bit of a similar experience. The 2000 Sydney Olympics happened when I was in my final years of school, so I was fortunate enough to have opportunities to be involved with the Games as a student ambassador. rolling out to different events around the city in the lead up to the Games. Also, I think they fell short a little bit on volunteers for the Paralympics, so we also had an opportunity to be involved in the volunteering around the Paralympics as well. So at that point in my life, the Olympic Games in Sydney really opened up my eyes to this amazing, very exciting, high-profile opportunity where people came together around some awesome sport. You know, we had Kathy Freeman at her peak, so there were some real headline events happening. And also the interesting thing, I think, for me at the time was we had some tensions around reconciliation in Australia. And if you remember the closing ceremony of the Sydney Olympics, there was some of those subtle kind of things that came through. But really something, I guess, that sparked my interest later on is looking at sport and reconciliation and social inclusion. How do we bring people together through sport instead of tearing people apart, tearing communities apart? The Sydney Olympics, for me, only in the last few years have I kind of reflected on it and seen what an impact it had. It kind of was, it set a trajectory for me. I've spent the next 15 years, 18 years now, researching, working, studying sport events. So certainly a mega in my life, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I think what that speaks to is people's definition of mega events and also their experience of it can be so different. So even under the, you know, the combination of words that we're discussing tonight, mega beneficial, or mega superficial, sometimes what starts as a superficial experience can turn into, you know, a lifelong journey or a book deal or, 30 years worth of conversations. But let's go to the Commonwealth Games, which has been front and centre for Queenslanders for some 8 years now. And Mark Peters, I'll put this to you. In terms of those future opportunities that you are looking forward to seeing become a reality, can you be a bit more specific about the potential benefits of the Commonwealth Games for Queensland?
Yeah, and mega events to me isn't about how much money you spend, it's the impact you have within community. So I'll never forget when we were in the bid stage and we would go out to the various regional meetings and talk about, well, we're from the Gold Coast in Queensland, and they'd go, where's that? Which is a real awakening, because having lived in Australia and that, everyone knows where the Gold Coast is. You either live there or you want to. It's just a natural occurrence. So that got us thinking just through the bid. And then when we started to talk about what makes a difference. And so what we're being talked about internationally now is a game of firsts. A games that's taken the bar very high in terms of what the challenges are. And that revolved around things like the first reconciliation plan that's been taken forward seriously. And I'm looking forward to that going, and Paula, and we got Ted here with us tonight. That's exciting to me to see what comes out, not just on the Gold Coast, Queensland, but Australia. And it's all about, being true to our history. The biggest parasport integrated program ever, and the sensational people like Kurt Fernley that just talk from the heart about what it means and what inclusiveness is. And the first time there's been equal medals for men and women, something that we would just think is a simple equation, but it's never been done before in an Olympics or any other major event. And then we look at the Gold Coast about, we've often been described as a city that doesn't have a culture, and we all drive up the M1 to Brisbane, and beautiful library and facilities it is. But now we've had a commitment from the city and the state government about the cultural centre, HOTA, which has just been opened in its first sense. So all these things are going to play out as a benefit of having 18 sporting competitions on the Gold Coast over 12 days. And I think that's what will play out in the next 3 years, 5 years, similar to Expo and the relationship to 82 games here in Brisbane. It's people lifting their eyes up, and it's not the what about me scenario, and we'll see that play out a little bit now post-games. And that's what happens in all games, so we're not terrified of it or anything else. But it's that vision of where the city's going to go, where Queensland's going to be viewed, because people that come into the Gold Coast are going to go up to the Great Barrier Reef, they're going to go inland, they're going to understand what we are as a state and what we stand for. And that's really important. So we're really pleased with where we've gone. And then what you love to hear about, and we've got some game shapers here tonight, and I still get emails and that from people saying, we loved the people of the Gold Coast. And Glasgow had a sign all around Glasgow, and they did a super job as well, said, people make Glasgow. And we've been trying to think of a catchphrase ever since, because absolutely the Gold Coast and Queensland, people make it. So we don't have to tag freight, we've just seen all the people responding, and the atmosphere and how safe and how much people enjoyed being on the Gold Coast was something spectacular. And that'll stick with me for a long time. And that's the reputation you want about your city. People want to come because they're going to have a good time.
That will stay with you for a long time. And I know you said money's not the primary thing, but the reality is it was a $2 billion investment.
1.5. Cost.
A net cost of 1.5, but even Premier Beattie, the former Premier Beattie, the number out of his mouth was $2 billion. It's a huge
Cost.
taxpayer layout.
Absolutely.
And so some of the things that you mention in there are wonderful in terms of culture and emotion, and the fact that, you know, there's a cultural centre on the Gold Coast that's established, perhaps directly related to the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games. But Alana, some of what you look at in terms of social legacy are things that matter to people long after an event like the Commonwealth Games, and that is employment. And I know you looked at Glasgow and the Gold Coast too in terms of training up volunteers and skilling up people to put them in a better position longer term for employment. Did the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games get that right?
Look, I think from what I've seen, the program that was put together, the recruitment, we had 45,000 people apply for those kind of positions. I think overall, based on what was delivered and the experiences had, I think is really positive. What I will say around that though is when we're looking at employment benefits broadly, so away from events, normally the biggest gains to be had are when we're upskilling people that are unemployed, untrained, out of work. I think those kind of social welfare models don't always fit well around an event where you need to have a successfully delivered event. You're going to have a huge number of people apply for that, and you want to make sure that you've got the best equipped workforce to deliver that event. So we really need to be careful, and this is not just in employment, but in a whole range of outcomes from events, in terms of managing our expectations, what's realistic. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have a successfully delivered event, it's very hard to secure the positive legacies that come outside of that event model.
Yes.
Mark might have some different perspectives around that, but I think we need to be careful what we expect that event will bring, and also making sure that we get the delivery right, because if we didn't, then that's what we'd be talking about now instead of the great legacies that are still yet to be realised.
That balance between opportunities for locals, but also this has to be run professionally because this is the Gold Coast on display to the world. And on that note, to our money man and the potential of trade opportunities, that was talked up a lot around the Gold Coast. How closely do economic professors look at the kind of money that flows to and from mega events?
We certainly look at it very closely, and we did that for the Gold Coast in particular. We have been working with the Queensland government on trying to assess the overall economic impact of the Commonwealth Games over a long period of time, over a period of time of a few years before and a few years after the Games. And of course, when we look at economic impact, we are, in a sense, not considering a number of additional qualitative benefits that, to some extent we've been discussing, like the social legacy and everything. But the numbers for the Commonwealth Games were actually quite positive, according to our estimates. Numbers in terms of increased gross domestic product, so increased output for the state, and also in terms of employment, creation of new jobs in the Gold Coast area and not just in the Gold Coast area. And these positive numbers come from a number of sources, including the fact that Queensland and the Gold Coast in particular, thanks to the Games, are now so much more on the map on the map for international trade, on the map for tourism, more opportunities for investment from abroad. And when you bring everything together, as I said, the final numbers look quite positive. So there is indeed an economic dimension that, at least in the case of the Commonwealth Games at the Gold Coast, paid off, if you want. That's not always the case. We have example of mega events where that didn't happen, but
Yes.
that's a different story.
Yeah, well, that will bring a smile to your face, Mark Peters. When you host a mega event, Paula, it is also, to some degree, a bit like having a big family party where extended family members come and there are different personalities and different cultural backgrounds, and that's where you played a strong role with the Commonwealth Games in terms of bringing some of our Indigenous culture to the world. What were the opportunities that you saw there, and also how did you overcome some of the ripples of protest that come with a mega event like the Commonwealth Games as well?
So I suppose it comes down to how I identify what protest is. And a protest to me is about having your voice heard. And when I was working with the CEO of the museum early on, we wanted to have our voice heard. And the best way to do that was to engage early, but not just engage, but to meaningfully engage. And so we met Mark. There was a group of community members, Aboriginal people, most of them were Yugambeh people, who met with Mark and talked about what this meant to us and how we could showcase and what legacy meant to us. So and then I started to work for the Yugambeh Museum. And language is something that's very important. Culturally, to be able to share, when you have family, you want to talk and communicate. And I think from working with Mark, they heard the heart of what we were after. Most people now know Jingri, hello, Jimbalung, the friendly games, Borrabee, the blue koala. Well, actually, Borrabee's just koala. But these things were a way to share language, to work with the volunteers, to be able to have an Indigenous educate and excite zone, to show people the heritage of the Gold Coast, because, as Mark had already mentioned, the Gold Coast apparently lacks culture, but it's because we haven't dug deep enough. And when you dig deep enough, the stories of the language and the place and the surrounds are very evident. And I think it's interesting to see how many, we have over 26 suburbs in the Gold Coast with Yugambeh names. The names are derived from Yugambeh words. If you extend that throughout the Yugambeh region, through Logan, out Scenic Rim and the Tweed Valley, you've got over 60 place names derived from Yugambeh words, from Carrara, where the Commonwealth Games had the opening ceremony and closing ceremony. Charara meaning footprint, or Gurara, the G and the K is often interplaced, and it means the flat land where the rocks are, that you can look at the stars and read what's happening in the sky. And I think some of those things, writing the book for volunteers, to be able to explain these stories and then have people say, I didn't realise the Gold Coast was so full of this amazing history and we hadn't been able to share it. And then the confidence of non-Aboriginal people to come up and ask questions and say, I now know something. I didn't know anything before, but it has given me the confidence to then ask you something else. And I think that's really powerful, and to unite a community and to be able to work and see these outcomes, to have Uncle Ted Williams and Patricia O'Connor travel over to launch the Queen's Baton and stand on that stage. For Yugambeh people, that's amazing, the stories in the Baton of the Gumbara, the macadamia. But for Aboriginal people, that's a first. For First Nations people, that's setting the high tide mark to say, you can do this. You have the right to stand there. You can participate. And I think those things were things we wanted, but we didn't realise how exciting it would be to participate in the opening ceremony. I had family and friends playing the didgeridoo from men from Darwin. It was something that we thought about and thought, this would be really good. We'll have didgeridoo players. But then to have men from all these different Aboriginal nations come and say, we're standing as one mob, not Kuri, Guri, Noongar, or we're coming together as one, and they did that. And even now, we're looking at what's our next project? What are we going to do together? Because this is how we build family, this is how we share stories, this is how we engage, and this is what becomes the meaningful legacy.
You can hear the excitement and the emotion still that's quite raw and real for you, Paula. And I wonder, Jackie, if we go back to World Expo 88, which has been remembered so fondly in this year in particular, 30 years on, do you think that organisers and volunteers had the same sort of aspirations at that time, that, you know, 3 decades on from World Expo 88, people would be remembering it so fondly and saying, this is what shaped Brisbane as a city?
I don't think anyone could have predicted this. It's actually weird, the amount we celebrate Expo. I say that as someone who hasn't stopped. But every anniversary that ends in a year, 0 or 5, well, we better do something for Expo, better mount an exhibition, better put out a book, because it means so much to Brisbane. So, I mean, you could see it's wonderful. These guys are practically glowing talking about it, and seeing some of the volunteers in here tonight. That's the way a lot of people in Brisbane who went to Expo still feel. We still light up all these years later about Expo. But no, I certainly don't think it could have been predicted. I mean, people marketing it predicted it. People marketing it said it's going to change Brisbane, and that was part of what we were sold. You know, we'll show the world, and we did as certainly mainstream Brisbane as in those 6 months and the countdown towards the event. We all sort of started to believe. I think you're right. I think we will show the world, and we were all certainly caught up, a lot of us, in this Expo fever. But this, 30 years later, that's actually quite weird.
Do you know if there were conversations at the time around money that was spent on World Expo as an event, as opposed to spending that money on, you know, needed infrastructure at the time, or you know, and to put it in a modern context, every time we talked about the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games on the radio, lots of people loved it and were excited about it, and those who were engaged with it, you know, couldn't wait to get on board and get to the events. But there was always a kind of a background question around, could this money be spent on air conditioning in schools? Could this money go into mental health services and things like that? Were those kind of discussions happening with Expo?
It was the 80s in Queensland.
Yes.
So
let's throw a party.
Those discussions, so Brisbane wasn't supposed to get Expo 88. It was thought more sophisticated cities, and with a greater population base, places like Sydney or Melbourne would be a more natural fit. But they did their feasibility studies and came back with, no, actually, that's a lot of money. It'd be better spent on health and education. So we went, what? We'll do it. We were cowboys. This is a city of entrepreneurs. This is a place that gets things through. It was a big events mentality. It's a sort of thing, a big project. It was a mega event. It was Queensland. It was big hair. It was 80s. It was Joe. It was like, we'll do it.
Yeah. Mark Peters, did you reference Expo at all in the lead up to the Commonwealth Games, or indeed any other mega events around the world?
Well, I think when we were looking to bid, and this was back to the then Premier Bligh, it was at the end of the global financial crisis. And again, what the Gold Coast found, it was tourism and construction, boom and bust. And there was a determination, I think, to how do we start to support what was the education system with Griffith and Bond and that starting to take a foothold, but how do we diversify the economy? So this was all about having a major event. So 82 is seen as when Brisbane believed it could be a challenger, and Expo convinced it was going to be bigger than Melbourne and Sydney. And I think for the Gold Coast to have such a huge event as the Commonwealth Games allowed people to start to lift their eyes and challenge themselves about, we don't want to be a boom and bust economy. We don't want all our kids leaving the Gold Coast. We don't want to be driving up the M1 every day to work. And so that whole basis of bidding was about that. So every decision we made then about a facility is we don't want a white elephant. It has to be a community facility. Where we put the village at Parklands, next to Griffith University, you know, an incredibly well-positioned university looking to be more international every day. and doing incredible things. A 750-bed public hospital, a private hospital, and here's a pot of land where we could build this upmarket village and turn it into to be part of the health and knowledge precinct, and attract overseas companies in that medical research area to come and partner with the hospitals and Griffiths. The development of Carrara was about getting back into the Asian market. The professional soccer teams and baseball teams and rugby teams that we used to be in, where they bring 150 and 200 people here for 6 weeks. They broadcast their heroes back into Asia every day. Now we've got the ability to do that. So, and fixing the internal road systems, and the state government has invested an incredible amount of money in that and the extension of light rail together with the federal and state government. So all those things came to fruition because of this vision of this city can be something pretty special, and this can be the springboard. So that's what I said. Mega in the future to me is looking back and say, we've had an expo experience, so we can have a double celebration.
Yeah. Who approached who? Did Griffith University come to you as the CEO of the organising committee, or did you go to Griffith and say, I've got a vision for an education connection here?
Griffiths had always had that vision with the state government about having a precinct. So the health and knowledge precinct concept had been around for some time, and there's been letters sent to previous occupants saying you will need to move. And then we had a choice of 13 sites to put the village, and in the end it became a series of conversations with the state government, with Griffiths, about, okay, this will work. And we've got Griffiths now working with the city and the state government already out there talking internationally about attracting these market research and other medical associated businesses. And it's like the back of house again. And we love stats. Gold Coast is one of the 5 best climates in the world. Go figure who did that research, but we love it. So it's about back of house companies coming with their expertise to work with people on the Gold Coast to develop more expertise and that sort of thing. So every decision made on a venue or a facility is about what's the future and what is this actually going to do. And that's why in the end we had basketball in Cairns and Townsville, and we had shooting in Brisbane because they already had Belmont, and we put the velodrome there because we didn't need a velodrome on the Gold Coast. And the vision for the state government was to have a state cycling centre in Brisbane. We went to Towns and Townsville because we didn't need any more undercover stadiums on the Gold Coast in the next 15 or 20 years, and they're basketball cities, and why not share with them? And that's worked out brilliantly. So all the decisions were made about future. And that's what we're looking forward to now.
All right. I do want to stay in the now a little bit though, Fabrizio, and in the now with the everyday cafes and restaurants of the Gold Coast, and some of the optimism that they had going in, and by all accounts, some people did very well, local businesses. Some had real concerns and had a real flat period over the Easter leading up to the Commonwealth Games, and then throughout, no doubt you would have seen the front page of the Gold Coast Bulletin, I think a week ago, that had sort of drawn our little mate Borrowby with a Pinocchio nose that said, you know, some people felt like they were pitched lies in terms of the potential rewards and financial earnings during the Commonwealth Games. For those who didn't do so well, Fabrizio, during the Games, do you think they will get kickback in the future from tourists, from trade opportunities, from some of the things that Mark referenced there, and that's where the benefit will be?
Yes, that's my expectation. As I said, when we look at the economic impact of an event like the Games, we have to take a medium-term or long-term perspective. So I certainly understand that there were situations during the Games or in the period just before the Games where the number of people in the city, and therefore customers in shops and restaurants, was below average. But as I said, if we look at the medium term, the impact of the game is such that there will be increased economic activity, an increased number of people coming for tourism, for business, for study. Griffith University, thanks to the partnership with the games, has gained visibility internationally, and with our Gold Coast campus in particular, we are now a major point of attraction for international students. So all of these will certainly increase the rate, the pace of economic activity, and small, medium-sized businesses will benefit from that. That's my expectation. And I base my expectation on, as I said before, our study that looks at the overall effect on the economy, and the numbers are positive. So we have to move a little bit beyond what happened over those 15 days and consider about the effect that is going to happen in the future. I also look forward to the future in this sense.
Yes, okay. I want to reference an article that came out a couple of years ago that talks about some of the mistakes that have been made with mega events in other countries. And it starts in Athens, where there's this beautiful field of flowers sparkling in the sunlight. It's an abandoned field. And there's a beautiful stadium all around it as well. And that was the Athens Olympic Stadium that was sitting there unused as Greece stumbled through its 6th year of negative economic growth. So that place turned from, crowds cheering at volleyball, swimming, canoeing to a field of weeds, essentially. If you go even further back, 30 years after the Winter Olympics were held in Sarajevo, Bosnia-Herzegovina was just an empty, crumbling city. If you go to Montreal, 1976, the event blew out by 1,250%. And you can imagine the economy copped it in the aftermath of that. More recently, the 2012 London Olympics, its projected budget doubled, and the sports-related investment clocked in at $15 billion. That made London one of the most expensive games ever. How do we make sure that costs don't blow out and big mistakes aren't made on a level in terms of the locals and the life they experience afterwards, and also in terms of the organising committees and what they put in? Alana, can I start with you?
Yeah, I guess so. It's a challenging question because there's so many different angles that you need to think about because of the complexity of events. I think one of the big cost factors for events are the venues, and as has been pointed to earlier, the state government working with Gold Ock and City of Gold Coast, I think, in my observations, in terms of venue legacy, I think moving forward will be one of the best models that future host cities will look back to. Venues have, in the most part, been positioned in areas of need. So, for instance, the Coomera Indoor Sports Centre was, I don't think the bid outlined that there would be a venue there, but when we got into the planning stages, it was identified that Coomera, being a growing area, a rapidly growing area, would need some kind of social infrastructure. So the venue was positioned there. The soundstage is another one. A strategic decision was made along the way, looking at what are the opportunities here and where could this money be better invested in developing, and I guess that links with the diversification of the economy. So we now have a soundstage on the Gold Coast that attracts international filming to the coast, which otherwise wouldn't have been possible, and it's meant that we don't have excess sporting infrastructure on the Gold Coast as well. To me, and we are undertaking a study around the venue legacy now, so in a year's time I'd be better placed to talk about that. But the preliminary understandings we have is that the design of it was collaborative, in terms of the venue program, things were built fit for purpose and also for long-term use. That hasn't always been the case for previous host cities. Often there's a bit of a battle between what an organising committee wants and what the state government or the host government want to deliver. And often the event wins because, as we discussed before, the event has to be successful. In this case, I think, from what we can see, the different stakeholders work together very productively. And I think you'll see in years to come really positive legacy and venues that are integrated integrated, so people use them without being really conscious that they were there for the games. It now just becomes the local place that they participate in sport. And to me, that's a successful legacy, such as, South Bank Parklands. Unless you were here for Expo, you don't know that they were purposely constructed for something. It's just part of the city. And I think that's what we need to look for in terms of positive legacies.
On Expo, there was debate at the time with Mike Ahern, the Premier, on whether that land should be sold off or kept for public use. I know it's difficult for you, Jackie, but can you envisage a world where it was sold off and it didn't remain the tribute that it is to Expo today?
Well, that was actually the plan. So our legacy is accidental. Expo was too popular. So, it wasn't a villainous plan. The idea was they did pay some attention to cost. So they was marketed as this isn't going to cost anybody anything, because one of the ways it's going to pay for itself is through sale of the land at the end of Expo to developers. But of course, Expo was too well loved, so by the end there was outrage at the thought of this space being removed from the public sphere. So it wasn't a plan, but Mike Ahern was able to react in time and stood up to a number of developers and people in his own party who wanted to go ahead with the plan, to change the plan, and that's one of the reasons we've got the legacy of Expo, because it was so popular in the first place that people revolted at the thought of this plan coming to fruition. So Plan B worked out very well.
Yeah, good. To Mark and Paula, again, you were so intimately involved in making sure this was a success, and maybe it's even too soon to ask this of you, but would you do anything different in terms of the lead up and the execution of the games, Paula, from a cultural perspective?
I think hindsight's always handy. So you learn by things that you do, and often some of these things haven't been done before. So when you step out to have a dream and share that dream, you don't know who it is you're putting your trust or the relationship with. We trusted a solid team of people, and we also were able to see that we had an Indigenous Elders reference group, or Yugambeh Elders reference group, and an Indigenous working group who worked behind the scenes as well. And that decision-making or that platform for decision-making, I think that will be a legacy in itself, and for Gold Coast, for culture, for language. And so I think some of the things that we didn't actually go to our first meeting with a plan in our head, that has been quite successful in just watching things naturally through relationship building start to evolve and become more purposeful. And I think they're the things that other places will probably learn from us. And then having the confidence to know, if I ask for this and I'm committed to delivering with you, that together we can do this. And being, I suppose, just confident and articulate up front of what we want to see. And I think that, for me, some of the things in language, knowing that we share language, but Goldoc picked up on that so that they had a word of the week, so their staff was learning language sometimes quicker than what I was learning Yugambeh language. Keeping up was always the plan. I think I planned to be in front, but sometimes had to catch up. And I think it became part of, organisations can do this. We can put language in community, which we already have, in places and spaces. Schools and educations are keen and working with us with stories and things. But workplaces, you can greet in language, Jingri. You can farewell in language, Nyanyabu, in your emails, in your conversations. In our workplace, we have signs up in language. And so it becomes part of normal every day. And I think that's what we were hoping, that we could work to, ensuring that Indigenous language and culture was just a part of everyday life and normalised. And this has been able to help us with the reach, because a small museum can't reach this many people, which a mega event, an event of this size, has been able to do. And not only just for Australians and Gold Coasters, but internationally. We saw the spikes in the opening and closing ceremony on internet searches of Yugambeh. What is Yugambeh? Who are these Yugambeh? What is this? And I think that's quite exciting for us to know, and to then think, okay, we now have to plan our next 5-10 years to be able to keep this momentum and support that and see how much further we can go.
Mark, aside from maybe the first 10 minutes of the closing ceremony where you would have perhaps lit up the athletes a little more, is there anything that you would do differently when you reflect on the execution of the Games?
I think 8 years is just full of learnings. But the first thing, back to an earlier comment you made, we put an honest bid book in. So we actually went out and we did mini costings on all of the venues. And we went to government knowing that we could run a Games within the budget established. And Minister Jones and Peter Beattie will make some announcements with the Premier in the next couple of months because we're reviewing all our contracts. And already we're confident we'll come within budget. That's unheard of in an event. Because often people are so worried about winning the event, they design budgets around winning the event, not what it's actually going to cost. And so I think for Queensland and the Gold Coast, that will be known forever as probably another first. But as you go through, I think the Games can be run a lot cheaper. And we've challenged the international body about some of the costs associated with the Games, having to do things earlier than we thought we had to. So we have a massive, what we call, transfer of knowledge program, where we are documenting everything we did and where we believe things can be done better, because events have to be run less expensively. And that's a challenge for the Olympic movement, and they've just done a massive study in how they can make Games less expensive, and also for the Commonwealth Games. We also learned so much as a regional city because we're a city of small businesses, and I think expectations, and you raised that question earlier, where some businesses had expectations that weren't met. There are so many businesses that did extremely well, but if you change your transport mode where people are on public transport, and being a local, I get amused when we talk about it was a ghost town. Well, 2.5 million people took public transport. That's unheard of on the coast. The light rail, the way heavy rail and the bus systems, because the government increased services, was absolutely fantastic. It was a joy. The day after the Games, we're back to, well, what are we going to do into the future? And so I think we learnt a lot around that, and I think expectations, and the city ran the Get Set for the Games program, was extraordinary in educating people. But we had a bit of a London experience where for the first 3 or 4 days it was really quiet because people were scared to go to places they normally go to. So I think expectations versus outcomes. You know, we can't wait to put our finances out there, to put information about the number of local businesses that have been actually positively affected by the Games being there, accepting though that there were some businesses that expectations were perhaps raised and they didn't achieve it. The 10 minutes of the closing ceremony, where our expectation was the athletes would have the lights on them. So there's a big review into who, what, why and all that. But all you can do is go, you know, the opening ceremony was spectacular and recognised worldwide, and all the right elements are in a closing ceremony, which can be pretty boring because the speeches are just part of it, and handovers. And also the athletes go back to the village and have a party. So there's a whole lot of things that we don't talk about, but you just love to grab that 10 minutes back, because that led to a few days of negative social media which shouldn't have been there for what was an outstanding effort by the people of the Gold Coast, you know, from the game shapers to our staff to all the areas. And perhaps the final learning is you have to have partnerships. You cannot do this by yourself. So the state government, its agencies, the city, were absolutely fantastic in working with us, and then we had the Griffith Universities come on board, the TAFEs and all that, which is a real collegiate achieving of something. And the skill sets that all those people gain into the future are just going to be exceptional and play out, and they're going to be inspired. And that's the thing that will be measured in 3 years and 5 years' time. And that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah. If you didn't know, the hairdressing salon in the Athletes Village was staffed by students from TAFE. The dining hall, the International Dining Hall, which is pretty spectacular in the village, had a series of either TAFE students or even high school students from Brisbane who travelled down there and worked there as well. So there's a kind of an education and a skill set tie-in there. And I think we should just think of the 10 minutes of the closing ceremony as your gift to Birmingham. You know, don't do this. In that transfer of knowledge, start with that. And,
Well, if
you
I was
know,
a betting man, I'd say there'll be less speeches at the next closing ceremony.
Mark is heading to Birmingham in June, correct?
Yes, they're part of our transfer of knowledge program.
Ladies and gents, there are some microphones that are wandering around, and we would love for you guys, we've got about 10 more minutes or so, we'd love for you to put some questions to the panellists. If you're keen to, just put your hand up and grab one of the ladies on either side with a microphone. Can I put a question to you, and I don't know if this is an existential question or a financial question, Fabrizio, but I think you're ready for it.
Okay.
How long is a legacy? Because when we talk about the financial benefits or the social or the cultural, the legacy attached to a mega event, how long do you give it?
I would be tempted to say a legacy is forever, and this might be true. My reading of what has happened before is that the legacy tend to be longer when things don't go well, and we see that, and we've seen that in some of the examples that you mentioned earlier on. Maybe not so much Sarajevo, but Athens, where the financial legacy of the games has been there, has been persistent for several years. In terms of a positive mega event, from an economic point of view, we have to wait a minimum of 4 to 5 years to start assessing the full extent of the benefit. And from that moment on, the legacy will continue. It's difficult to put an end. I'm thinking, for instance, of the infrastructure that has been developed for the Gold Coast. I mean, that's infrastructure that is going to benefit the community, the business community, but as the civil society for many, many years in the future. So part of this will be direct legacy from the games. Part of this will be, new actions, new activities that are introduced progressively by different governments and different entities. But really, when you look at something like the Commonwealth Games, where there was so much planning around what we build and why we build it and how we put the money into different, as I said, infrastructure or different activities, well, that legacy is going to stick for a long time, which is exactly what we want. There have been situations where the legacy was positive but vanished quickly. One thing that is also evident from history is that the legacy tends to last longer the smaller and less known the hosting community is. So in a place like London or even Montreal, the legacy is not going to last for such a long time, when instead we have had examples of mega events in smaller hosting communities, and there the impact has lasted for a much longer time.
Wow. Okay, 4 to 5 years' time, Mark Peters, what are you doing? When's your contract end? To assess, that's what I'm thinking. When's your contract end?
In a few months, so I'll just be enjoying myself.
You'll be enjoying yourself, but in 4 to 5 years' time, when Fabrizio is publishing a paper talking about the financial legacy of the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games, I bet you won't be able to resist reading it. And neither will I.
I'll send it around.
Yeah, spread it around, share it around. Hello.
Hello, thank you for giving your time this evening. It's been very enjoyable. I've got a question about costs, and I wonder about the hidden costs that we don't, and whether we do calculate them, such as the, not putting air conditioning in schools, and what's the cost to those children in the middle of summer in learning cost. What's the cost of our senior executives across all the emergency services, the police, etc., who would have been involved in hundreds of hours of meetings, are they costed, and what's the opportunity cost of the time they've spent? So I just wonder, are those costs ever really considered in when we say this was the cost of these events?
It's a very valid question. I think sometimes the opportunity cost is always a struggle for anyone to talk to. So, if I look at my grandkids on the coast and their friends that talk about, wow, how great was this, and this city's terrific, and we want to, how do you value something like that as against having air conditioning? But the point is there are lots of costs that aren't in budgets, and you're absolutely right, because how do you cost some of those meetings that might happen within departments? But then how do you cost the inspiration on top of that? So we talk to people, and what an unbelievable job Queensland Police did. Transport on main roads, early on there were some learning experiences for them, but they responded fantastically. So those people involved in something that we would say is not their bread and butter work, where they're lifting their eyes up and saying, what's possible by extending light rail? What's next? The M1 has to have a solution. So let's not talk about it, let's find those solutions. And so, one of the greatest legacies may well be a solution to the M1, because the 3 levels of governments are seriously talking about it. So you're right, there are costs that you can't put a dollar against everything, but I think the positive side of that is similarly, how do you put a cost against inspiration? How do you put a cost against unity and accessibility? How do you put a cost on those inspiring actions and words by Kurt Fearnley? That's all part of what a successful event does. It creates that inspiration and people to think, we are a community that cares, and we can do these things. And the impact of our games on accessibility is just phenomenal. And I've had the International Paralympic Committee talk to me about, we're going to use the same model in our major events, but we understand that we still have people in countries around the world that have a disability that are just neglected. And to finish on one point, because I know Kurt well and he's fantastic, but he crawled the Kokoda Trail and he's written a book about it and about his whole life and this. And he talks about coming into a village and everyone knew who he was and the party he was with and they were celebrating. And he saw kids just shoved in the corner of the village because they had a disability, and he went and he spoke to them. And then months later he got feedback, the positive impact that it had on those kids and their status within the village. So how do you put a value on those things? And that's what we have to strive for as a community. And if mega events can help us do that, and all the economics and all the facilities and that, fantastic. But it's that bigger picture stuff, whether it's through reconciliation, whether it's through equality, accessibility, they're the things that as a management group and our board, that's what we were driven through this exercise. That we can pack our bags pretty quickly, and 1,500 of my 1,800 staff have packed them already. Bump into fantastic game shapers wherever we go and have a good experience. But how do you value that? And that's, I guess, the counter of, yeah, I accept there's an opportunity cost and a difficult one for governments, but I just know the impact it's had, and I know how this has had an impact on the Gold Coast and Queensland.
And for us, I was having the Yugambeh Youth Choir, so we had Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children perform in the closing ceremony, something that they could never have dreamt of. And the Yugambeh Museum has a tagline, Mobo Judgem, for tomorrow's children. And we're always looking for opportunities, which this has given us, for a platform for them to stand, to acknowledge who they are and to celebrate that, and to be able to be given a platform in front of not only just the Gold Coast where they were standing on the stage, and when they stepped off the stage and the Australian athletes are there and touching the possum skins on the girls, and they were like, oh my gosh, I couldn't imagine this. And the fear they had before they walked on the stage, to see them stand and unify together, are things that I won't forget. They're things that I know we can make a difference in these children's lives just through an event and participating and giving them that opportunity. So for us, seeing young fellows, young boys 13 and up in the didgeridoo orchestra, standing with men from Darwin, strong cultural men. I think that's amazing. That's a legacy that we wanted, but we didn't imagine that it would happen.
Jackie?
I'd like to also answer that in relation to Expo. I'm going to steal my answer from the Deputy Director of Entertainment, Barbara Absalom, who said, in a very simple way for people who may not go to theatre or dance or arts or anything like that, Expo is, of course, an arts event. It's a cultural event that it became a phenomenon, and it's such a great example of the value of putting money into arts, because we're all still talking about it. It lifted people's hopes. It changed the psyche of hundreds of thousands of people. It raised their expectations and their confidence. And they may not understand that if money is only spent on the basics of life, then life becomes basic.
Do we have another question?
Hello, thanks for. I might just preface my question just with a couple of examples of mega events that we've had here in Brisbane. Expo, of course, which everybody in Brisbane who attended it, still celebrates it to this day, and we seem to have this collective madness almost about its impact on the city. And of course, the G20, which was back in 2014, which is probably the most recent mega event, if you could call it that Brisbane's had. My question is, do we actually overrate the non-local impact of these mega events? I can't recall where the G20 before ours was located. I don't know where the one since was located. I don't think I've ever heard of another Expo since Expo 88, but we celebrate it as this great thing. So is it a case that these things are like world famous in Brisbane or world famous on the Gold Coast, and the rest of the world actually forgets about it very, very quickly? Because one of the messages that is sold about these events is it's going to put Brisbane on the map. It's going to put the Gold Coast on the map. The world will talk about us. Is it the reality that the world actually doesn't talk about us at all and quickly forgets about us?
I think they're ephemeral events, and we do put a little bit too much weight in them and a little bit too much expectation. They're stepping stones, so we can't go Expo 88 was fantastic and done. So that needs to follow up. You need to continue to invest. You need to continue to find, all right, what's the next way that we can bring attention or help or culturally invest, or what's the next thing we can do? So yeah, they're not solutions. I think they're steps.
Yeah, I'd agree. And that's what we talk about, legacy. So, as I said earlier on, I remember going out at the bid stage and the number of people that said, which Gold Coast? Because there are 7 or 8 around the world and half of them are tourist destinations. I can assure you now around the Commonwealth, everyone knows the Gold Coast is a beautiful city in a beautiful state in Queensland, Australia. And I was taking one of the young I guess they're all young, athletes back from an event, and he'd just won a gold medal in the swimming, and he was a para-athlete. And he said, I have to go tomorrow because I've got a competition in Barcelona in 10 days' time. But I love these people, and I've had such a great time. I'm coming back. And my family's coming back. And so many of these sports people are leaders of their countries in the future. So what does that mean? We don't really know, other than people know where the Gold Coast is. So now the challenge, and the government's got a legacy committee that's chaired by Rob Borbidge, cities involved in it. So now you don't just go, that was great. Now the work is probably just as hard as looking at what does that mean for Queensland into the future. The challenges around what events you attract. They're not necessarily sporting events, they can be arts, culture events. So the legacy bit is, and there's a great quote from Kurt, which I can't remember the exact quote, but it says, it won't just happen, you've got to make it happen, and you've got to work hard. And so that's the benefit in working hard, just as hard after the event as during the event.
It's a great question though, and also it's one that my husband asked me in talking about Expo, and he said, can you name another city that's held World Expo? I did Google it last year, Kazakhstan. It's a big one. Previously, Spain's had it a couple of times, Italy a couple of times, Milan, Paris had it.
Well, the
That's a big one. Remember that one?
Torre Eiffel was built for
Well famous in Paris.
May I just quickly say that the Commonwealth Games was the mean through which we have put the Gold Coast on the map, not the reason why we've put the Gold Coast on the map. And that's important because people will come to the Gold Coast and will do business with the Gold Coast. Initially because the Gold Coast has been known for the Commonwealth Games, but then they will continue to do that because of the environment, because of the opportunities, economic, social and cultural opportunities that the city of the Gold Coast and the state of Queensland offers. So in a sense, it will be forgotten that the Commonwealth Games were held at the Gold Coast to some extent. But the flow of business and tourism and attractions to the Gold Coast will continue because the Gold Coast is a very attractive spot to do business and to visit and to have a cultural experience. So I believe that the point is to bring the Gold Coast on the map in the first place. And then once it's there, it will continue to be there because it's a very attractive place to do things.
All right, ladies and gents, we're going to wrap it up, but I have two very quick questions to finish, and then I'm going to get you to vote on a very important question. One is, Mark, someone wants to know who's right. Did the Games cost $2 billion or $1.5 billion? So can you clarify the difference between that number? Because when I went to the Athletes Village and received the paraphernalia from the Mayor, from the Premier at the time, it said $2 billion was the price tag, but $1.5 billion is banded around
So
too.
there's gross cost and net cost. So the cost is $2 million. The net cost, because of all the revenue we've brought in, makes it around 1.5. So the cost and the Queensland Government, to their credit, have underwritten the event. So the cost is around 1.5 million.
Gotcha. And the final question, people commenting on Twitter about how people are still excited 30 years on from World Expo 88 and want to know how much longer will we be excited about World Expo 88?
I think as long as everyone that attended is alive.
Oh, great. Okay. So my final question tonight is for the audience and the panel, and I want you to vote by raising your hands, because the point of tonight was to talk about mega events and whether they're beneficial or not. And of course, that goes to whether or not we should host more mega events in the future. So my question to you is, should South East Queensland host the 2032 Olympics? Yes. Raise your hand if you think they should. Yes. 4 out of 5 on the panel, and I would say maybe 40% of the audience, would you say? You're the economist, you're the numbers guy.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Maybe 30, yeah.
Slightly less than half.
Less than half. Well, we'll see what happens. Watch this space. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming out tonight. Can you please thank our panellists for this evening? Alana, Jackie, Mark. And I should say too, the State Library's next Queenslanders in Conversation event is on the 9th of August. It will explore the secret stories and untold histories of Queensland's diverse islands. My colleague Craig Zonka will be asking the question, is there a balance between cultural protection of islands while still driving the desire for tourism? So come along to that if you can on the 9th of August, or stream it online, however you like to get involved. And a final plug for Jackie's book, We'll Show the World, Expo 88. It's for sale out the front. Jackie will be out there signing copies as well. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, guys.